In the 1950s, Ray Kroc, the man who built McDonald's into a global empire, told a room full of Harvard MBA students something that stopped them cold. He said, "I'm not really in the hamburger business. I'm in the real estate business." At the time, it sounded like a strange thing for a burger executive to say. Today, it's the whole story. McDonald's owns more real estate than almost any private company on the planet, over 40,000 properties, worth more than the entire burger operation combined. So let's actually break this down. How does a burger chain quietly become one of the biggest landlords in the world? Why do some franchise owners get genuinely wealthy while others barely scrape by running the exact same brand? And what can this whole system teach you about how real wealth actually gets built, even if you never open a single restaurant in your life? Stick with this one, because once you understand this mechanism, you'll never look at a strip mall, a gym franchise, or even your own local coffee shop quite the same way again. Here's the part almost nobody realizes when they walk into a McDonald's. When someone buys a franchise, they're not really buying a restaurant. They're signing a lease with one of the most disciplined landlords in American business. The burgers, the fries, the drive-thru, all of that is just the mechanism that generates rent. Once you see the business this way, every decision McDonald's makes suddenly starts to make sense. Where they choose to build, what they charge their franchisees, why some franchise owners get rich while others barely break even running the exact same menu. It all comes down to one asset that most customers never think twice about: dirt. And once you start looking for this pattern, it shows up in far more places than just fast food. Back in the 1950s, Ray Kroc was just a milkshake machine salesman who convinced two brothers, Richard and Maurice McDonald, to let him franchise their small hamburger stand concept nationally. But early franchising was messy business. Franchisees paid small upfront fees. The company earned thin margins on top of that, and there was no reliable way to guarantee long-term, predictable income for the parent company. Then a financial advisor named Harry Sunborn looked at the numbers and proposed something radical. Instead of just licensing the brand name, McDonald's would buy or lease the land itself, build the restaurant on it, and then lease the entire finished property back to the franchisee at a markup. Overnight, this one structural change meant the company no longer depended on burger sales for its income. It had built itself a permanent, recession-resistant revenue stream that had almost nothing to do with how many burgers actually got sold that day: rent. Sonneborn even went on to say, decades before it became a popular saying, that McDonald's was a real estate company that happened to sell hamburgers to fund it. That single insight is arguably the most important financial decision in the entire history of the company, more important than any menu item that ever launched, including the Big Mac itself. Let's break down exactly what happens financially when someone opens a McDonald's today. First, there's an initial franchise fee of around $45,000 just to license the brand and the systems. Then there's an ongoing royalty of about 4% of gross sales, paid monthly, whether the franchisee is actually profitable that month or not. But the real number, the one almost nobody outside the industry talks about, is rent. McDonald's typically charges its franchisees somewhere between 8 and 15% of gross sales in rent, on top of everything else already listed. Compare that to the royalty percentage, and you'll notice something important. The rent check is usually 2 to 3 times bigger than the royalty check every single month. Put simply, McDonald's makes more money acting as your landlord than it does acting as your brand. And unlike the royalty, which only comes in if sales actually happen, the rent obligation is often structured with a minimum guaranteed base, meaning the company gets paid a steady floor amount, regardless of how the store performs that particular month. So how does this actually work behind the scenes, years before a single burger gets sold? McDonald's runs an internal real estate division that behaves less like a fast food company and more like a private equity real estate fund. Their team identifies high-traffic intersections years before an area even fully develops, based on population growth models, traffic patterns, and future zoning plans. They then buy that land directly, or sign extremely long leases, sometimes 20 years or more, locking in low costs while the neighborhood around them quietly grows in value. Once a franchisee wants to build a location there, McDonald's leases the finished, ready-to-operate property back to them at a significant markup over what it actually costs the company. Here's the key part. As that neighborhood appreciates, as home values rise, as new businesses and residents move in, McDonald's captures that gain, not the franchisee. The franchisee is the one running the day-to-day operation. McDonald's is the one that owns the appreciation sitting quietly underneath it. This is also why McDonald's real estate team is famously selective about location. They're not just picking a spot that will do well as a restaurant this year. They're picking a spot that will still be one of the busiest intersections in that city 30 years from now. Let's actually look at where McDonald's Corporation earns its money, because the numbers tell the real story. In a typical recent year, the company generates well over half of its total revenue from rent and lease payments collected from franchisees, not from company-operated restaurant sales. Its property and equipment holdings are valued in the tens of billions of dollars. This is exactly why financial analysts don't really compare McDonald's to Wendy's or Burger King anymore when evaluating the stock. They compare it to real estate investment trusts, the same category used for shopping mall owners and office building landlords. That comparison isn't a joke or an exaggeration. It's structurally accurate because the underlying cash flow behaves the same way. The stock itself trades on rental income stability just as much as it trades on burger sales growth, which is exactly why it holds up so well even during years when consumer spending on fast food slows down. During economic downturns, when many restaurant stocks get punished hard, McDonald's tends to hold up noticeably better than its competitors. And this rental income base is a big part of the reason why. It's the same reason a shopping mall REIT can survive a bad retail quarter better than the individual stores inside that mall can. The landlord's contract doesn't really care whether any single tenant, or in this case, any single franchisee, had a great month or a terrible one. Here's the part that genuinely surprises most people once they see the actual math. Owning a McDonald's franchise is often marketed as a fast track to wealth. And for some people, it absolutely can be. But the profit margins are thinner than the glamorous image suggests. After paying for food costs, labor, the royalty fee, required marketing contributions, and rent back to McDonald's itself, a typical single location nets somewhere between 6 and 9% profit margin on total sales. On a location doing about $3 million a year in revenue, that works out to roughly $200,000 to $300,000 in actual take-home profit, before the owner's own personal overhead and taxes. That's a genuinely solid income for one location. But it's nowhere near the empire people tend to imagine when they picture the Golden Arches and assume every franchise owner is quietly rich. Many single-unit owners work extremely long hours themselves, often putting in more time on site than a typical corporate employee ever would, just to protect that 6 to 9% margin from shrinking any further. So where does real wealth actually get built inside this entire system? Almost never from owning just one location. The franchisees who build serious generational wealth are the ones who scale into multi-unit ownership, sometimes owning 10, 20, even 50 locations at once, run like a genuine professional small business empire with real regional managers and management layers underneath them. At that scale, the underlying math starts to shift in the owner's favor. Fixed costs spread out across far more locations. Purchasing power for food and supplies increases significantly, and the owner starts to resemble a regional operator running a company rather than a single shopkeeper working the register themselves. Some of the wealthiest private individuals in America built their fortunes exactly this way, not by inventing a clever new burger or menu item, but by patiently acquiring dozens of well-located leases over 20 or 30 years, and simply letting that portfolio compound. It's a slow, unglamorous process on the surface, closer to running a small logistics company than to running a single restaurant, which is exactly why it doesn't get talked about nearly as much as it should. This exact real estate playbook isn't limited to the Golden Arches either. Chick-fil-A famously requires a comparatively small upfront investment from new operators, while keeping extremely tight corporate control over site selection and the underlying real estate itself. Starbucks, Chipotle, and Taco Bell's parent company all run internal real estate divisions using the exact same underlying logic. Even outside of fast food entirely, this same pattern shows up again and again in gyms, in car washes, in self-storage facilities. The business you see on the surface is always the customer-facing product people actually interact with, but the business quietly running underneath it is a controlled, steadily appreciating real estate portfolio. Once you learn to spot this specific pattern, you genuinely start seeing it absolutely everywhere you look. Even large national gym chains often don't own their equipment or their brand value as the main asset. The parent company frequently owns or controls the real estate underneath every single location and simply licenses the brand and systems to whoever wants to operate the gym floor day to day. Car wash chains follow a nearly identical structure, where the corporate parent quietly owns the physical site and the equipment, while local operators handle staffing, customer service, and daily upkeep. In almost every one of these cases, the operator takes on the operational headache and the day-to-day risk, while the real estate owner sits back and collects a steady, contractually guaranteed payment, regardless of how busy any single day happens to be. Here's the real takeaway from all of this, and it actually has nothing to do with opening a franchise yourself. The wealthy don't just build better products or better brands. They build ownership structures where the day-to-day operating business generates steady cash flow, while a completely separate asset layer quietly captures the long-term appreciation on top of it. Even on a much smaller scale, this exact same thinking still applies to you. If you run any kind of business at all, ask yourself this one question. Could you separate the operating company from the property or equipment it depends on, so that value compounds specifically in that asset, rather than only showing up in this year's sales figures? This is precisely why so many financially savvy small business owners choose to own their commercial property through a completely separate entity, then lease it back to their own operating business, effectively building their own small-scale version of exactly what McDonald's does at a global scale. Today, McDonald's real estate portfolio is worth well over $30 billion, spread across roughly 40,000 locations globally, and that number keeps climbing steadily as land values continue rising in the exact neighborhoods the company identified decades ago. Heading through 2026, as commercial real estate conditions shift and interest rates move, that rental income model gives McDonald's a level of stability that most retail and restaurant brands simply don't have access to. It's a business quietly built to survive recessions, survive inflation, and survive changing food trends, because at its actual core, it isn't selling burgers to survive. It's collecting rent month after month, whether the burger trend of the moment is up or down, even as newer, trendier, fast casual chains rise and fall around it every few years. That underlying real estate engine keeps quietly compounding in the background, largely untouched by whatever is currently popular on social media. So the next time you drive past a McDonald's, you're not really just looking at a burger restaurant anymore. You're looking at one of the most quietly brilliant real estate portfolios ever assembled, patiently over 70 years, disguised the entire time as a simple drive-through. If breakdowns like this actually help you understand how money really works underneath the surface, subscribe to Finance IQ. We take apart the real economics quietly hiding behind everyday businesses every single week.